Hello, I'm Regina Botras, and this is Backstage, where we talk with the who's who on stage, in dance, comedy and performing arts, speaking with the leading theatre makers of our times and how they came to the stage and what drives them and inspires them. Priscilla Jackman joins me to talk about cost of living at Sydney Theatre Company production at Wharf 1. Priscilla is a multidisciplinary director working across theatre, opera and screen. You may have seen her work in RGB of many, One or White Pearl. She wrote and directed Still Point Turning, was assistant director on The Father and The Hanging at STC. She directed Opera Australia's The Barber of Seville. She also directed the Appleton Ladies Potato Race by Melanie Tate. She's directed Belle Shakespeare's work. She's worked at the Conti Opera under Barry Kosky. Look, she has done so much. And she's here to talk with me about the cost of living. It's a fairly new work, a Pulitzer Prize-winning work, playing at Sydney Theatre Company at the moment. Welcome, Priscilla.
Thank you, Regina. It's great to be back.
Thanks for coming on. So I wonder about the real cost of living, like the title, I suppose, to start with. Are we talking about how much it is to live in the city right now? It's more than that, I know it is. So tell me what the kind of title where we start.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? The terms become so much part of our vernacular. And of course, the play written back in 2018, winning the Pulitzer Prize, it doesn't actually refer to the cost of living that in the same terminology that we use day to day at the moment here in Australia. Of course, it is in some ways about the literal cost, but it's also a metaphorical term. So basically, the play is structured around two different couples, one at the start of their relationship and one at the end. And it really asks the question about how we as humans connect and need one another to survive. Class is a really interesting and sort of deep-rooted theme, and that idea of privilege that can span, of course, disability and non-disability, but also class, and also in some ways the privilege of our history in terms of our human relations with one another. So the cost of living is a much broader term in Martina Marjork's world, I suppose, than what we might be using day to day here in Australia right at the moment.
And I understand there's a care worker, that kind of relationship, rather than an emotional relationship, which is, it is an emotional relationship. But also you think of the, power with the carer. The lines get really blurred. Do you want to set maybe the scene a little bit more in this situation?
Yeah, so we meet Jess and John. John is a PhD graduate from a very wealthy background. He's studying at Princeton University, having graduated from Harvard. He comes from a wealthy family and he's looking for a carer. He has cerebral palsy. Jess is applying for the job when we at the start of the production. And yes, the lines do become blurred between their relationship. I think the really interesting thing for me, Regina, about Martina's script is that for me it sort of takes every stereotype that we might have about power and dependency and caregiving, and certainly a sort of ableist view of disability as otherness, and flips all of those stereotypes on its head. So as Martina herself says over and over again, it's not a play about disability, it's a play about humans. And that sense of us all having a great capacity of need to be cared for and to care, regardless of our privileges, is something that comes through over and over again. So one of the couples, yes, John and Jess, are at the beginning of their relationship, and the other couple, Arnie and Eddie, are 21 years into they've actually separated, but into a marriage. And they are coming back together in a way that's quite challenging for them both. Eddie is desperate to be back in Arnie's life. Arnie has suffered a horrendous accident and is quadriplegic. And Eddie has come back into her life. And there's all sorts of, again, very beautiful and interesting and challenging and wonderful conversations at the heart of their love and their relationship with each other as they navigate that sort of new world order, I suppose, and none of it is what we might expect as an audience. It's really startlingly fabulous work, which is, I suppose, why Martina sort of won the Pulitzer Prize. There's a real craft, and it's quite an extraordinary script, thematically, but also in terms of the language and the way she's crafted the narrative.
Has she drawn on her own experiences in the writing?
Yeah, she has. So I was lucky enough to meet Martina. I did a little research trip myself to New Jersey back in February. I was really interested to go to all of the places that the play is set in. So I went to St. Maisie's Bar. So the first scene takes place. The first scene and the last scene are an epilogue and a prologue stand outside of the scenes that make up the body of the play. So we meet Eddie in a bar, St. Maisie's Bar in Williamsburg, at the top of the show, and then we flip back in time for several months, and then it runs its course to the end scene where we rejoin Eddie later on that night. But I experienced St. Maisie's Bar. I found St. Maisie's Bar in Williamsburg. I sat and had some drinks and some food with my Aussie friends over there. I also just wanted to really walk the streets of Jersey City. I went to Newark. I went to Princeton. I went to Bayonne, where Eddie lives. And one of the highlights of the trip was meeting up with Martina herself, actually in Manhattan. She was stoked that I was staying in New Jersey because she said everyone always stays over in New York. But I wanted to entrench myself in the environment of our characters. So Martina talked to me about the Jess character, I suppose, as the closest parallel. I have a friend who's a playwright, and she says all characters are always all parts of us, actually, as writers. But Martina certainly had lived experience as the character of Jess in some respects. Jess is a daughter of a migrant. She's first-generation American. Martina herself came over as a child to America from Poland. She was brought up by a single mother, like the character of Jess, and she cared for a couple of men, I think, beautiful young men like John. In some ways, has been the start of that character anyway. So yeah, there are parallels in her own life and her own lived experience in terms of the subject matter.
Talking about the cast, how have you gone about casting the roles of, is it paraplegic and cerebral palsy?
Well, Dan Dorr is my creative partner in this. We are co-directors, and he also plays the role of John. So we met back in 2018. I was absolutely gobsmacked to experience his one-person show that he brought to Sydney Festival. It was called Beast. It was a movement piece and really deeply provocative. And I was deeply moved by his physical presence and prowess and on stage, but also by the themes that he was inviting us as an audience to sort of dissect, I suppose. And I left the theatre, quite transformed by this work that I'd seen, thinking that he must be some sort of, Berlin artist who'd come over to Australia as part of the festival. And I was delighted to do a deep dive and realise not only is he an Aussie boy, but the two of us grew up in Brisbane in around the same time. For a couple of years. I was there, and Dan was there for about 4 years. He trained at Flinders in Adelaide and, lived in South Australia. But I had this extraordinary kind of international career because he never had much work on Australian stages. In fact, he tells a very interesting story that he was told he would never have a place on the Australian main stage. So it's a really monumental time for us, actually, because it challenges all of those myths that he was tested with. But Dan and I struck up a beautiful kind of connection. I sent him a message after seeing his show, and I just said, I'd love to talk to you about that piece. Do you have time? And he was flying out the next afternoon, and he sort of cleared his diary, and we sat with each other, and not actually knowing each other, also recognised that we had a deep connection. We talked everything art, we talked about our body of work, we talked about critics, we talked about our desires and dreams, and And we kind of left that very special meeting thinking, yeah, we found a kind of kindred spirit who's going to now be over the other side of the world, and who knows when, but we'd love to just work together at some stage. So we kind of kept the friendship up, but just very loosely, an email here and there, or, filling each other in on different shows we were doing, etc. And I came across about a year later this script by Martina Mayok, and as soon as I read the opening pages, I was hooked. And then, of course, when I met the character of John, I just felt in my bones this was written for Dan Daw to play. Now, I didn't know whether he also would have that feeling, but I sent him the script and said, listen, I think you would be an amazing John. What do you think? And he wrote back, I remember, Regina, he wrote, I fucking heart this. Let's do it. And we thought that we would have doors open to us because it hadn't been produced in Australia. It was clearly a script that was absolutely fantastic, and in terms of its theatrical possibilities and excellence, the piece of writing. And yet it was quite a difficult pitch. I think artistic directors were terrified of the casting. But even when I said I have Dan Daw, don't worry about the casting, I have Dan Daw, there was resistance actually when we first started to pitch, and we pitched across the country. Then, of course, COVID hit, which didn't help and put everything on hold. We found Kate Hood during that time, and we did a play reading off our own bat. And it was from that moment, I suppose, that Dan and I knew absolutely firmly, like, no matter how high this mountain was to climb, we were going to try and do this and make sure Australian audiences see this production. Eventually I was speaking to Lee Lewis and started conversations again with Kip Williams about the work. And really it is the support and I suppose the opportunity that the two companies, Queensland Theatre and Sydney Theatre Company, have given us that we're so grateful for. That means this work is now being shown.
Do you think some of that resistance was basically kind of some of these things that you talked about, this ableist attitude?
Absolutely. I think definitely, COVID didn't help, of course, and nor did the floods in Queensland and, things like that. But I think it's really important that we look at ourselves as an industry quite honestly. And when you think about it, it is very rare to see an actor who has a disability on our main stages, even one actor in a cast, let alone a play that like this one, which demands two actors with disabilities are in the cast, and that there's 50-50 parity of non-disabled and disabled artists. And perhaps there was a question too around what the quality of the work would be. Let's face it, Kate Hood, who plays Arnie in our production, is a fierce accessibility advocate, and she often talks about the siloing of work. People maybe support work for disabled artists, but it's in a kind of envelope of community theatre or separate from something else. And so what we found so extraordinary, all of us, Kate, Dan, Philip Quast as well, myself, the actual dramaturgy of this work is about characters who are both disabled and non-disabled, and how we as humans all need each other. So what we find remarkable, particularly Dan and I, in sharing the direction of the work, is that we ourselves represent, I suppose, another couple within those two couples that we see on stage. And we, in our production, had gone a step further and have almost that 50-50 parity with our creative team as well, for artists who have disability and are non-disabled. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity to bring this work. And the irony, as I said, Martina repeats over and over, is it's just about humans. And so any sort of stereotype that we have seems to dissolve, really, because we see these characters as rich, complex characters. And Dan and Kate in particular talk about the relief of being able to play characters that aren't always likeable, that are deeply flawed. And we see these, I suppose, ourselves through the lens of these four figures in space.
I can't help but think of the conversations that happen in the foyer afterward. I think we're all have naturally had that conversation, or those thoughts of like, what if something terrible happens? And, will I still be in this relationship? Will they take, those kind of conversations I can't help but think about.
I think what's interesting about the work also, we're presented with these, the four characters, and we're just able to see sort of snapshots into their life over a series of vignettes. The structure is really interesting. So we have a prologue with Eddie in this that finds himself in this peculiar situation that he's in this hipster bar, well out of his depth. He's kind of a kind of trucky character. But then we spin back in time and we see humans at either end of the spectrum, I suppose. We have the wealth of the apartment where John lives and inhabits, juxtaposed with Arnie, who probably lives in some sort of government housing. And, we were asked a couple of times in the Queensland season why we were doing the play with the American accents. And there's really important sort of, I suppose, rigour that we placed around that choice. One of the key things is that the text itself is written with the very rapid kind of Jersey rhythms and the Jersey humour. So simply transposing that to a kind of an Australian dialect doesn't really work for the rhythms of the piece anyway. But also I think it's really important that we trust the theatre literacy and the intelligence of our audiences. I don't think as humans we need to go and actually literally see ourselves as Australians on stage to understand that there is a human resonance in experience that is being exchanged. And I suppose the third reason is that I think the situation in America at the moment is a real testament to what can happen as a society if we don't care for one another, if we have to live in a system that doesn't have the support, doesn't have NDIS, doesn't have Medicare. The American system really indicates for us as an Australian audience where that can go for individuals. And so, I think it's a really interesting play for us to both see ourselves in and also as a warning, I suppose, of what's, important systemically.
Interesting. And I can't help but think of you going there and then listening to the pacing of the way they speak, or did you speak with people? Did you say, I'm doing this play, like, can I talk with you? Or, what was it like to be there?
I didn't go into detail as to why I was there. I did speak to people in my travels. Obviously, the richest conversation was with Martina herself, and all of that kind of visuality and certainly the stories that we shared in the room about, for instance, the difference of what the feeling was like in Princeton as opposed to in Newark really supported, I suppose, what we were aiming to do with the authenticity of the play itself. We have an extraordinary designer, Michael Scott Mitchell, because it's actually very challenging work. There's the two different apartments, as I said, on different social scales. We have the bar location that starts the show, and then there is a scene as well in the streetscape of New Jersey, so a busy Jersey street. But juxtaposing all of these environments is the most intimate, I suppose, places of our privacy, and that is the bathrooms. And we see John in the shower and with Jess as carer, and we see Arnie and Eddie in her bathroom as well. So there's a really beautiful call to, I suppose, question what that sort of visual poetry is of water. Scenes are often talking about characters entering wet, or it's raining, by the end it's snowing. And in the midst of all this, we have these two exquisite scenes around the ritual of bathing. On top of that, the complexity, of course, is that, of course, the set design had to be accessible. Kate is in a wheelchair. Dan Dorr is not, although the character of John in the play is written to be in a wheelchair. So there's been amazing support from the stage management team in particular and the production management team of these companies, because I think that there's a lot of demands in this work. The least of that is probably the disability, non-disability factor. Actually, there's a whole lot of other layers as well.
Well, Priscilla Jackman, thank you so much. I can't wait to see it.
Thanks, Regina. I really hope you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear from you after you've seen it.
Well, the incredible Priscilla Jackman there with Cost of Living, playing at the Wharf at Wharf 1 until the 18th of August. Get along and see it. It just sounds terrific.